His was the only boat to arrive.
I think maybe it was a cow. I don't know.
There's the thank you letter from Lyndon Johnson.
There was even a monorail at one point to the east of us.
Plus, everybody forgets about pirates.
This is the coolest field trip I have ever been on.
I don't know, but I've been told keep on dancing, won't ever get old.
Hello and welcome to the Long Island History Project, the podcast that brings you stories and interviews with people passionate about Long Island history. You can hear them all at longislandhistoryproject.org. My name is Chris Kretz. I am your host, and our opening music is courtesy of the Homegrown String Band. Today we are focusing on a small part of the South Shore of Long Island in the town of Brookhaven, a village off the main road, a village that was lost and then found, built and then restored, like and unlike its neighbors, and a place that has become a very special part of today's very special guest.
My name is Victor Principe. I've been in Bellport since 1981, but my ties to Bellport go further back than that because many, many years ago, I wanted to be an actor, and I discovered this place called the Gateway Playhouse. This was in 1968. I was basically in high school. And I went to Bellport to do summer stock, and I was involved in building sets for the theater. I did some children's theater there, and I was there about a month. And that's how I learned about Bellport. And it wasn't until many, many years later that I came and I actually purchased a house there. So I spend some time in Bellport, summers mostly, and weekends, and then the rest of the time in New York. I'm a native New York City resident. And I've been fascinated by Bellport ever since I got there. And that's why I wrote, actually, it's a total of 3 books now on Bellport, my latest being Unhampton Preservation and the Happiness of Place in Bellport Village and Environs.
Yeah, great. And first of all, thank you for joining us. We were just talking, it's a very cold, well, up where I am in the South Shore of the Long Island, we're in a cold snap, but we appreciate you joining us. We're on Zoom today. And yeah, we'll talk about all the books and preservation. So maybe as a way in, I live in Sayville, just for your background. So I've driven through Bellport. I think after this episode, I'll definitely be taking a look myself a little closer. So what were those first impressions? What do you remember soaking in as you first explored Bellport back in the day?
Okay, well, back in 1968, I was really mostly on the Gateway campus, which was much bigger than it is today, because all that property that's been developed behind it, all these houses, they weren't there. They were all part of the Gateway estate. I didn't get into the downtown of the village so much because I was working there, and it seemed like a very long walk to go to downtown, which I did occasionally. Now, of course, it seems like nothing to me. But in those days, it seemed very long. But I noticed how nice it was when I went in there. I thought the village was really very neat. It had all these old houses. I was very much into old architecture and old history. And, so I sort of thought, yeah, this is kind of a nice place. And then I just basically put it aside and didn't really go back until the early 80s.
One of the things you wrote was that the Bellport of the 19th century survived the 20th to be enjoyed in the 21st. So when you look at Bellport now, with everything you've learned, like where would you situate it in time? What is the golden age or era that's being preserved in Bellport, would you say?
Yeah, that's a good question. Bellport, the village, and as a summer colony, it all came about quite by accident because the Bell brothers wanted to build a commercial seaport there. Because it was situated very well. It was situated opposite a wide inlet to the ocean. What happened was in the 1830s, the inlet started to close. In fact, it completely closed by the end of the 1830s. And so the Bell brothers' desire for a commercial seaport didn't make sense anymore. So it sort of went into this sort of decline. And it relied on farming and, just the local kind of economy was farming and cordwood and just things that other places such as Sayville and Patchogue, and they all did basically more or less the same kinds of things, although Patchogue had rivers, so it could actually build mills. Bellport didn't have that. So that was the early days. And toward the end of the 19th century, with the railroad coming in to the South Shore, all these towns became, places to go to because the inner city people could just take the train out to the beach. So all these villages on the South Shore, especially west of Patchogue, became summer resorts and built hotels. And Bellport was a little bit past that in the sense that the railroad did not reach Bellport until I think it was 1888. So it was a little bit further away, but somehow being inconvenient like that was also a draw. So people would learn about Bellport and take the train out, stop in Patchogue when the train arrived there, which was several years earlier than Bellport, and take a stagecoach to Bellport. And it started developing quite by accident as a summer place. And one of the attractions it had that the other towns further west did not have was elevation. Basically, there's a ridge that goes through Bellport that the other villages on the Great South Bay do not have. So it provided elevation and views, and it made it very attractive for people to come there. So the wealthy from New York started building houses there. They also had hotels for the middle class. It became sort of a summer destination. And by the turn of the century, it was really strong as a summer destination, all the way up until through the 20s. And then in the 30s, the Depression, things changed and nothing really happened. A summer colony remained there, but basically Bellport was sort of forgotten. And it was basically forgotten until probably the 1950s and 60s, when Brookhaven Laboratory opened, and scientists came in and they were looking for housing, and they found this little village with beautiful houses that basically was forgotten. So everything was preserved, and they sort of discovered how nice it was. And it still was a very quiet place until the 1970s, the late 70s, when sort of this avant-garde from New York discovered it. And then it became more and more popular with New Yorkers, because up until even the 80s, when I first came to Bellport in 1981, most New York City people did not know what it was. Some Long Islanders did. Many Long Islanders did, but New York City people did not. And it wasn't until probably the later part of the 90s that it became much more of a destination for the summer again. And that's why it became sort of like what I call the Unhampton, because it was sort of closer to the city, more convenient, not as expensive at that time as the Hamptons. So there were articles being written about it, and it was often called the Unhampton. So basically, with this current book that I have, I appropriated the name Unhampton with the explanation of preservation, because I wanted to be a book about the preservation movement in Bellport Village and its surroundings, which is also East Patchogue. And I go also to Patchogue because its history is very tied in with Bellport, in the sense that it was sort of like a foil for Bellport. It was the opposite of Bellport in many ways. And at the same time, it was also had a lot of similarities. And then, of course, also going east to Brookhaven Hamlet, which shared a lot of similarities with Bellport.
Yeah, and we've talked to a few people about preservation, and just doing research for talking to you. The village has a number of, and I think 6, if I counted right, historic districts. And we talked to Preservation Long Island, and it's more ground up preservation. If the grassroots level or the local level is where it really happens, it's not something that the federal government is going to come in and help you. So where would you rate, to put it bluntly, the preservation results in Bellport? Is it a more well preserved than other areas, would you say, or from what you know of other areas of Long Island?
Well, one of the things that really helps preserve places is when they become obscure. So Bellport was very fortunate that it was really obscure until the late part of the 20th century. And then it was sort of rediscovered. And nothing much happened. And so when nothing much happens, and plus it's a very tiny place, things don't change too much. So we were lucky that way. That was before anything else. Also, we had big personalities, starting with, I would say, Birdsall Lotus Edie, which is in the book. And she was actually born in Bellport, but she was sort of, she was a Gilded Age lady. She was born I think in the 1870s, and she died in 1940. And she loved Bellport, and she basically really did a lot. I mean, I don't think in those days they would call her a preservationist, but when you look back, you realize that she was probably the first preservationist in our area. She did things. I mean, the major thing she did was really in 1921 when the Montauk Highway was being extended east. Her father was a senator, so at this time in 1921, he was no longer a senator, but she obviously, she still had influence, and she spearheaded a movement to get New York State to bypass Bellport and Brookhaven and East Patchogue by half a mile to the north. So when you drive east on the Montauk Highway and you get to where South Country Road starts, I mean, there's a sharp turn, if you notice.
Right.
Okay, and there's a reason for that, because basically the highway was going to go through there, but she got it to bypass. So this way, the countrified atmosphere basically stayed along there, and it makes it sort of a place apart.
But just in terms of that early 20s, move to preserve their isolation, and in terms of the golf club, we'll talk about the golf course that was there and some of the country clubs. There was an element of, and you use the phrase, the social restrictions of the time. So there, in terms of the preservation aspect, there's also an element of that strata of society trying to keep their enclave away from the modern times, and some of that was, I'm imagining, anti-Semitic restrictions in the courses, and like you're saying, keeping the main highway away from their main street.
Right.
Which that's not really a question, but I guess it's
I think that we have to realize that, basically as a society, not too long ago, we were sort of very exclusionary and racist. I mean, that's a fact. But I don't think so much that was, that was the way it was. So, yes, the golf course the golf grounds, they called it, of 1989, extremely racist. They didn't like Bernard Baruch, because he was Jewish. They didn't want him. So, and that was one of the reasons why now we have the other country club, golf course, where it is today. That was partially done with public subscription, and partly private, spearheaded again by the Edies, by Birdsall Lotus Edie and her husband, because Bernard Baruch and her husband were Wall Street buddies, and they were both upset that Bernard Baruch couldn't be in the golf course, and the original golf grounds, the 9-hole golf course on Academy Lane. But I think that was just the way it was. I don't think that really affected preservation, or maybe I can't see really how it affected preservation. I think it was really things, or maybe I should say that, for example, the not having the main road go through the village, keeping people out maybe was a byproduct, a distant byproduct, I would say, of that, because I don't think that was the reason. I mean, there was still, the road was there. South Country Road is called the Old South Road, so it was there. I mean, it was a public.
Right. There was no wall or something.
In fact, we have also information that she was very much against widening the streets. They called them the street wideners, because they take down trees. They do, so I think it was more of an aesthetic thing for the people who, at the time. But in terms of what has been preserved, as I said, so it was a sleepy town. It was sort of became obscure after being this accidental, let's say, summer place, and then it was, forgotten after that. And when it started being rediscovered, Bellport was very lucky. Both Bellport and Brookhaven were very lucky. They had visionaries living there. For example, Stephanie Bigelow. I mean, she wrote the first comprehensive history of the area. And she also pushed for a Bellport historic district, which at the time was not like the historic districts we have today. And I point this out in the book, that they're very different, that it was a precursor of what we have today. And she was thinking along those lines. And she also raised awareness, because what she did do is get approximately 80 buildings in Bellport Village to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And by doing that, she raised the awareness. She made these buildings are important, because now they had national recognition. Unfortunately, on the national level, getting listed on the National Register doesn't protect the buildings. All it does is identify them and says these are important to our history and our culture, but it does not protect them from either owners or developers or anything else. It's only, and to your point, Reed, you said about the local thing, only local ordinances that will do that. So it's important to have that, because it does protect from federal projects. But if it's a local project, again, it's so crazy. So you need to have really both, have complete protection. But if you had to choose between the two, you would want to pick the local ordinance, because that gives you better protections for the local environment.
Right, and you're talking about the flow of time from being forgotten, isolated, and then being rediscovered, and there seems to be a very point of danger when this starts to get rediscovered, but you have a sort of small window to protect it before
exactly
the rediscovery leads to redevelopment and all that.
Right, but also not only is it a small window, you have to have people who step up to the plate. So we were lucky in this sense. First, it was Stephanie Bigelow. Then we were very lucky that we had a mayor. I mean, he was mayor for over 30 years in Bellport, Frank Trotta, who also understood that Bellport Village was special, and he actually then created a master plan for the village of Bellport, because they were kind of scared of the growth. They didn't want Bellport to become like a lot of other places that basically lost their charm. And then we had people like Carol and Ed Blesser. Again, I go into this in the book. And they pushed together with Mayor Frank Trotta for the local ordinance. And Frank Trotta had tried in the past to do this, but the village wasn't ready. There were people who loved the village, but to pass an historic district and really restrict what people can do with their property is not something that, a lot of people won't accept that. And at the time when Trotta tried to do this, I think it was in 1989, it was basically was rejected. It was a form of historic preservation. It was going to be under the auspices of the Architectural Review Board, but the trustees did not go along with it because there just wasn't, the political will just wasn't there. And it wasn't until there was the schoolhouse there, the academy, the Bellport Classical Institute that people call the Academy on Academy Lane. The last owner passed away, I think, in the 90s, and it wasn't protected because there was no historic district there or anything. And that was one of the impetus to start an historic district, because people said, "Oh, well, this is an old house; it has deteriorated. If we make it into if we landmark, I should say, really landmark. This is before historic districts. If we landmark this house, then no one's going to buy it. No one's going to buy it. It's a mistake." Well, they went ahead and landmarked the house, and then Tom O'Brien purchased it immediately. So it had nothing. He restored it beautifully. So that way of thinking, and it still exists. there's a lot of misinformation about historic districts and landmarks. People think that, if people can't do what they want with the house, then, you lower the value of the property. And that simply is not true. But at the time, again, people didn't know that. So it's with people like Carol Annette Blesser, Frank Trotta, Stephanie Bigelow, and I'm sure there were others, you started sensing, well, this place is, we have a lot of very interesting things here, and we should try to preserve them. So, that's really how, at that moment, decisions were made that were beneficial for the village. And the same thing was going on in Brookhaven Hamlet. And, for these things to happen, not only do you need the right people at the right time, you also have to have a political consensus from the residents. And it takes time. I think in Bellport, it took longer than it did in Brookhaven, maybe because the population is different. I'm sure there are several reasons. One of the things about Brookhaven, of course, their real overriding interest was really conservation, which of course is very related to preservation. In fact, it's a form of preservation. It's natural preservation. So you had people that were very interesting. Of course, it was Art Cooley. There was Dennis Puleston, people like that who pushed for conservation and getting rid of DDT and doing all these sorts of things, and also saving the land. There was Betty Poulston, who gave acres and acres of land, and before that, there's the wartime wildlife preserve, which is just east. It straddles basically Brookhaven and East Haven. That was given in the 40s. So families in Brookhaven Hamlet donated land to add to the refuge. So it was luck also, but not just luck, because you can have luck to a certain time, but then you need to sort of pull it all together and then actually draw up plans and laws that actually will outlive everybody and continue protecting what the purpose for the laws. But the problem is that the laws, the ordinance, must be respected. So if you get an administration that is not doing that, then you start getting in trouble. And I don't know if you've seen the epilogue of my book, because I'm very critical there about what is recently has been going on in Bellport. And I'm worried, because I think there are certain changes where people just forget things or just don't care. And we lost a couple of, I think, important houses that were not landmarks. It's always a balancing act. It's always trying to make people understand and educate them. And it sounds like elitist, but I don't think it is elitist, because basically when you have a sense of place, and that's the whole point of this book, it's a sense of place is an intangible that is made by the tangible, such as, open land, preservation, conservation, how things relate to each other, a sense of scale. All those things brought together make a sense of place. And it has been shown through studies that people are happiest when they know where they are, when there is a sense of place. If they're a place that has no sense of place, like a roadway stop, or it's nowhere. It's like anywhere else, gas station.
Well, yeah, I was going to try to bring us to some specific examples, some success stories of what's been saved. So, from your eye, what are the 2 or 3 highlight buildings that you would say you have to go to walk past this in Bellport, or that you're most
in Bellport?
Yeah, that you're happy survived.
Well, I'm thrilled with the Academy,
which is that school building. Yeah,
that school building. Now that again, it was landmarked before the whole street became an historic district. So, as I said, as you mentioned, we have several historic districts. The dates and the names are all in the book when they became historic districts. Most of them, I think there are a total of 6, and all of them except one were created during the Frank Trotta administration because he really was into this. The mayors after Frank Trotta were not so interested. And it took, I think, apparently, so when Frank Trotta was mayor, that we had a new historic district every year. By the way, I was also on the Historic Preservation Commission for several years. So I was involved in, so not with the 2017 one, but the previous ones, I was involved directly in establishing those historic districts.
Okay, so just to zoom in a little still, let's talk old houses. So in terms of buildings that exist or, interesting architectural details that you've found or that have come before you in those capacities, again, what are some of the highlights of Bellport that you see?
Well, as I said, the Academy was one, and that's landmarked and everything else. There's also, of course, Academy Lane, which is really, those houses are mostly Greek Revival from the 1820s to the 1850s. And they've been restored by, most of them were restored by a firm called Pierman. And they were basically, and a lot of them were enlarged because when the street was established, the houses were smaller. So these were enlarged, but they were enlarged with an eye to their history and their location. So that street now is basically, it's a monument to 19th century American design. The houses themselves, it's really, as a group, they're important. Individually, they're nice, they're interesting houses, they're historic houses. But what makes them really special is the fact that they're part of a group on an extremely lovely street known as Bellport Lane. And the whole feel of it is a very sort of harmonious feel. It's a street that just gently goes down to the bay. The other house that's very important, of course, is Netherby, which is, I think it's number 76 South Country Road, which is not landmarked. We couldn't get it landmarked, but it is protected by restrictions on its deed. So there are only certain things that owners can do to that house. They can't change it from the outside. Another building of note would be what they call the Pelletreau House, which is a landmarked house on Bayberry Lane. They call it the Pelletreau House because one of the first presidents of the Historical Society owned it for many years. It's owned by someone else now, and it's actually an 18th century house that used to be in Amityville and was floated down to Bellport in 1921. It was going to be torn down, and this man saved it and brought it down to Bellport. And the person who did it is in the book. There's another house that is not native to Bellport, which is a simple 17th century cottage, which was basically abandoned in Peconic. It was right next to a highway. And the Brown family in the 1970s dismantled it and rebuilt it in Bellport. So we have, in 50 years, in about 6 years, that cottage will be considered native to Bellport, while the Pelletreau House is already basically native because it came in 1921. So these are the earliest houses that are not native to Bellport, but because Bellport basically is a 19th century town. It's not an early town. The Bell brothers came in the 1820s, but there were basically plantations, as the Brewster Plantation earlier on in the 18th century. So it was around, it was discovered in the 18th century, basically the area, but Bellport didn't become a town until the 19th century.
Right. We can say before that, even the Unkachog Indians were the original, and then it was purchased from them. Yeah. So I'm going to pivot a little bit because I'm always fascinated. We're talking about these physical structures that remain, but in terms of the surrounding evidence of the history of the town and maybe the visuals, and this might bring you back if you can think back to the research you did for the earlier books. But I'm thinking particularly about like paintings. So the painters, the artists that were attracted, that were capturing scenes, and then the name I discovered from your book, which I'm fascinated by, was Frances Toms, an early female photographer. So, how did that play into any of your efforts or the preservation efforts, having that evidence of what the town would have looked like over time?
Well, Frances Toms, I mean, it was very unusual. She was originally from Canada, and she came to Bellport. We knew exactly where she lived. I think it was 29 Bellport Lane. She basically documented Bellport in that period when she was there, which is, Bellport's golden years as a summer place, the early 20th century. And she took a lot of pictures, and she also made them into postcards. She hand colored them. She did all sorts of things. So she left a record of basically what Bellport was like. I mean, it's pretty amazing. But we also have, of course, painters like William Glackens, who painted many scenes of Bellport. He documented, for example, the Bay House Hotel that became the Jewish Vacation Society for Women Hotel, which was a summer place for inner city Jewish shop girls. And we have other artists. And, they were fascinated with the quaintness of the village, and the light, I think, had a lot to do with it, and the views. There's a certain light with water and bay, that artists like. You see it also with artists that used to, New England, especially Gloucester. They're painters that would go there and paint because of the light. So we have that light that is very attractive to painters and artists and photographers. And even much later, we had, Bruce Weber, the fashion photographer who came, I think it was back in the 80s, who, again, did a lot of photo shoots there because he was attractive. And we have, of course, the actress Isabella Rossellini. We have a young man who now has a gallery there, Mark Wagner, who is an artist and also has a gallery. And there are so many others probably that I don't know that have come here and just, it's just sort of it's like a natural attraction.
Right. And it's funny because we were talking about, how these areas fall out of fashion or get forgotten. And yet when you start digging into the record, you see there's some pretty amazing documents you can find back in the day that capture what it looked like. So
exactly. Right. And there were a lot of postcards by people that just, companies that just did them. Just put, pictures of the hotels, because there were a lot of hotels here. And that's, that's another thing. The hotels that are mostly all gone now, they were all gone by the 60s. The last one, I think, was the Wyandotte that was torn. Well, actually, the last one is still existing, and it's the Bellport Hotel, which is right on Bellport Lane, and it's an apartment house now. And there's a restaurant on the base, and that restaurant bar has been there since day one of the hotel. But the last big one that on the water that no longer exists, and it was torn down in the 60s, was the Wyandotte, where I understand Judy Garland once stayed, famous people stayed there. But when those went, it's very interesting because, the land, today that land would be, it's so valuable, they were overlooking the water and everything else. But, the land was basically empty because Bellport, no one knew about it. Everybody forgot about it. It's just sort of, but then when in the 70s, for example, there's a house that was built right near the part of the property of the Wyandotte Hotel called Moonfleet. And it has gorgeous views. It's a nice house, but it's not, it's not a McMansion. So we were very lucky that, during the 70s and 80s, when Bellport started becoming known again, that people who built on this land that was left over from where these hotels were, did not build McMansions, because those can really, they can be out of scale. They can just change the whole tenor of the place. So, and the other thing, of course, that was done in Bellport, and I'm sure other areas as well, but it sort of really, I guess it's because of the size of Bellport, it really had an impact, was moving houses around. There was another hotel known as the Goldthwaite, which was another very popular hotel. And some of those cottages still exist as private homes. They were moved, a couple blocks away and stuff were turned around. And then the land was built, if those things were moved, there was another property that, again, fit in, but nothing enormous was built.
Well, it's sort of an irony in that we prize these houses today because we're fighting to preserve them because they carry forward the past. Whereas in the past they had much more practical. They were tearing their houses down, floating them down rivers, turning them around. I'd be curious what they would think of our current fascination of locking their houses in place. So I don't want to keep you longer, but I want to make sure we get to. Is there anything else you want to say, especially about is that Unhampton book fairly recent? If you want to plug it more?
Yeah. Well. Have you seen it, or?
From what I saw, it's only on sale through the Society's page.
Well, actually, it's on. You can go to the Bellport Village Historical Society website. You can order it there, and also it's at a shop in Bellport called the Storefront has it. But one of the things, this was a labor of love. All the proceeds go to benefit the Historical Society. It doesn't go to me. Because I really feel that it's important for people to understand that this place that we had, Bellport, East Patchogue, and Brookhaven, and Patchogue, I should say, are truly special places where I feel so lucky to be able to live in a place like this, and one of the reasons why I wrote this book is because I'm also afraid that what I'm seeing now is sort of a forgetfulness or taking for granted of what we have, and it doesn't take much to lose a place, and that's what I talk about in my epilogue. That we really have to be careful and not destroy this legacy that has been given to us. Otherwise, we won't be able to hand it down. I mean, it's so easy. If you just look around the world and you see how places can change for the worse, it doesn't take much. So I'm hoping that this book will contribute to somehow make people aware of what they had and want to preserve it.
And I want to thank Victor for speaking with us, helping us unravel the importance and difficulties of historic preservation through the lens of Bellport Village. We will link to related resources in our show notes. That's at longislandhistoryproject.org. That will include ways to get his books, the two published as part of Arcadia's Images of America series, and the newest, The Unhampton, about preservation in Bellport. Again, a lot of history that we didn't get to, information about some more of those eccentrics, the scooters on the frozen bay, even if you listen closely to our intro and the mention of the monorail to the east of us, that was in Bellport, so you can unravel that mystery. And at this point, I would usually ask you to share us with a friend, which please go ahead and do if you so feel inclined. But we're going to shake it up. We want to ask you to drop us a line if you are listening to this. Whether you're a new listener, old listener, have come back, send us an email to longislandhistoryproject@gmail.com. Let us know what you'd like to hear. We've got a few lined up, but always curious to hear about what Long Island history subjects or places or time frames most interest you. Our outro music is Capering by the Blue Dot Sessions, used under an Attribution 4.0 international license. That wraps it up for our trip to Bellport. As always, thank you for listening.